Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Changemaker20. It's been a while since we've had one of these as we've diversified our virtual speaking series and opened the doors to pave way for important conversations in the world of anti-racism and lasting systemic change. As always, I just want to thank you for joining us and being a part of our journey. If this is your first time tuning into any one of our platforms, I just want to say thank you for tuning in, but also that this is a platform where you get to chat with some of our subject matter experts. And so if you have any kind of inquiry, any kind of questions, definitely plug them into our chat below. Just make sure that you leave your chat tool to everybody as well as attendees so that everybody can be involved in the conversation. Today, we have Mirella De Civita, who is the president of Papillon MDC, a management consulting firm that serves an array of private, public, and social sector institutions in designing and implementing leadership programs that focus on optimizing individual and organizational potential. She holds a PhD in psychology, postdoctoral fellowship in behavioral medicine, and a licensed clinical psychologist with expertise in the area of psychopathology, risk and resilience, behavioral medicine, and treatment adherence. Today, we are going to continue our sense-making conversation from last week with Mirella, who spoke to us about decision-making. We go through the decision-making process every day. Just now, Mirella was telling me she's made over 35 decisions already this morning. And just another example, I worked out yesterday and felt that I deserved ice cream. Unfortunately, I knew what the right decision was, but proceeded to not make it anyways. Now, those decisions aren't the ones that we're going to speak about today. Instead, we're going to speak about the decisions that are in the gray area, the decisions that feel that are both right. And so, very interesting conversation that we're going to continue. But just a side note, if overcoming ice cream craving is something you'd like to do, we do have a conversation that we did have on this that you can check out on Talk Boutique's YouTube channel. But back to the matter at hand. Mirella, today, can we recap the case studies that we went through last week? And can we break them down one at a time to explore this topic at hand?
Sure. So we started off by taking a look at Lucy, who is a subject matter expert, and she obviously was given an opportunity to practice influencing without authority. And it was seen by her manager, and I would have to assume by the entire organization, as one way for her to get closer to what she had stated to be her desired goal, which was to become team lead and eventually a manager. And as we went through that scenario, it turned out that she actually had two options in front of her, both of which were right. The first one was to go ahead and practice that skill and learn and make mistakes and grow from there. And the other one was having her refuse the part that involved her influencing without authority and just keep doing the statistics that she has been, she's been known to be really good at. So I had also kind of compared Lucy's situation with Maika, who was the VP of Ops, and I sort of brought in there another level of complexity, and that is Maika's situation, having to make a decision that would impact more than just her and her future direction. And I use the word luxury to mean that, Lucy still has the opportunity to focus more closely on her feelings, closely to what is instinctually feels good for her, and potentially maybe also compromise for the time being her desire to become a team lead. Mm-hmm. Whereas where Maika was intended to go, she would be impacting a lot more than just herself. She'd be impacting her colleague. If she chose, which was option 2, not to talk to him, to bring it up in a team meeting around their team charter, mm-hmm. because obviously the colleague had done a behavior that went against the team charter. And then I brought in Alex, and Alex was now—
Before you continue, let's break down these two first, and then let's move on to the other case studies. That way we have clear in mind kind of what their process was and a little bit of the dilemma that they faced. Maybe we can start with Lucy. So what were the two options that she had again?
So her two options, well, these were the two options that she saw, because we can get into how the mind works, right? And so the two options that she saw, which was option 1, go ahead and take that role and learn and grow, and option two, which was to just do the statistics, which was also part of that role, and definitely say no to the bigger chunk of that role, which was to influence without authority.
And so why would she say no?
Well, again, when we take a look at where Lucy is in her professional career, she is a subject matter expert. She is still learning to be one. And she herself felt at the time that she didn't have enough experience, enough knowledge, and she didn't feel she had the skill set to influence without authority. So obviously the option that she had in front of her was to say no to that part and
Mhm.
just assume the role that she felt was most comfortable.
Okay. And did Lucy end up making a decision?
So Lucy did make the decision. Her decision was not to take option two.
Hmm.
In other words, actually not to take option one, as I had put it out, was option one was she would do the role of influencing without authority. Option two was no, just stick to the statistics. And so she chose to do that.
Hmm.
Even though her manager wasn't supportive of her decision, she made that decision.
Yeah.
Now, you and I can sit here and debate it and say that was a wrong decision.
Mhm.
However, remember that a right and right dilemma, there is no wrong
Yeah.
decision. It is one that Lucy at the time felt that she could live with.
Hmm. And so when it comes down to some of these decision-making processes where it is a right and right decision, there is no wrong answer. What is the outcome that we look for? And not in the physical respect of the result, but is it an outcome that we're looking for through growing in our decision-making process, or is it an outcome that we want to align ourselves with our values by making a decision? I mean, so what are we looking at when it comes to these right and right as any kind of indicators that maybe we're
Mhm.
on the right track?
I think it's very important for everyone to recognize that these dilemmas present themselves quite differently as we grow in our leadership, if we're looking professionally, and if we're looking over at our personal lives as we grow in our responsibilities.
Hmm.
And so when we take a look at Lucy, we really can't compare Lucy to Maika. We can't compare Maika to Alex. Each of these individuals, they are living at a specific moment in their lives where this particular decision for Lucy was bigger than any other decision she has had to make up to that point in time.
Hmm.
Therefore, when we talk about what are the indicators, obviously, the whole concept of remembering what the mind can and cannot do. So one of the things that I also talked about was this moment of being woke. In other words, recognizing that our mind will often start to associate these two options as a right and a wrong versus right versus wrong. It will also start to play into our instinctual desires, our self-interest, will start to limit our ability to recognize the impact of our decisions, because what the mind is trying to do is to simplify things, look for coherencies, and minimize all ambiguities. Now, Lucy, in her particular moment in time, is probably not thinking that way. She's probably not faced with a moment in her life where other people become equally important. We move on to Maika, and then all of a sudden we start to recognize, or at least she starts to recognize, that more than just herself will be impacted by her decision.
Hmm.
And therefore, once again, we are looking at a different level of reasoning with Maika that we don't see with Lucy.
Hmm. And so in regards to Lucy, she made the decision to go with what she felt was right at the time.
Mhm.
And so how can we say that we can confidently go with that decision if ever we feel like we need to make it? Because that decision is not always easy, and you may face repercussions for going with that decision. And
Right.
so what are the benefits of moving towards kind of like the morality or the value, or sticking to your values? Like why should we continue to do that, or how can we
Yeah.
value that?
I think it's also very important to clarify that whatever values seem to be very important to Lucy may not be the values that are important to you and I.
Hmm.
And so this is what makes decision making that much more complex. One way in which obviously scholars and those who have experienced these gut-wrenching moments have come to believe, have come to actually experience, is to use a structured approach. A structured approach that allows you to not just see the right and right option that appears to you, but to actually have enough courage to sit with many other minds and start to look at that situation, potentially producing other right options. And then start to really understand, where do the personal interests lie? What are the attachments to the people involved in these options, as well as start to consider the consequences moving forward. So therefore, when we take a look at Lucy, she obviously feels right. She still feels right today. Today she's 4 years out in her career. That decision, when she looks back, had an impact. She wasn't promoted as quickly as she thought she would, but she wouldn't go back and make any changes.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, when we talk about values, I believe that each and every one of us will make that decision. I certainly don't purport to know the right way. What I do know is how the mind works. And very much the way I said, the mind that notices the dilemma, I don't believe should be the same mind that's going to arrive at that decision alone, in part because the whole concept of woke is recognizing that there's feelings, there's instinctual desires involved in that, there's values that might be in conflict. There is your way and what way you think is the best way. And then again, woke speaks to recognizing that it doesn't have to be your way, and it doesn't have to be just a consequence for you. It has to consider the consequences for many. And to be able to reach that level of awareness requires accepting what comes natural to a mind. Just like this morning, 35 decisions I made automatically, right? I obviously paid attention knowing I was coming here today and counted how many, but all of those same decisions I make every day. I just don't pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about a right and a right dilemma, I am a firm believer in really designing a formula, one that you use to help you get as close as possible to an option that has an impact greater than just the future you design for yourself. And it includes many other people that are going to be impacted by your decision.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing is, error proof.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question of, at what level are you making the choice to reason things out with others?
And as you mentioned, this gets more difficult the higher up you go, and the more people are affected by your decisions.
Correct. And of course, in our own personal lives, the more responsibilities we take on, the more we begin to recognize these dilemmas to have a different feel. Today, as I said, a few years later, Lucy is not bringing the same factors potentially that she brought to that initial dilemma. She's now already in her thinking and how she speaks out loud with me. I can already start to notice that she's broadened her understanding of her decisions and what this means beyond her self-interest, beyond her values, and beyond the consequences that she is willing to live with. So
Mm-hmm.
4 years later, she's also experienced many more things that her 4-year, younger self didn't have.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I want to explore all the other case studies as well, but I don't think we're gonna have enough time today, because they're all so interesting and you can go into so much depth with it. But what I do want to know is, as a trained psychologist, as someone who works with so many high-level professionals and high-level executives, what made you feel like the decision-making process is vital to mental health?
So that's an incredibly good question. So let me break it down. First, what made me feel that decision making is vital and incredibly important to look at from this particular perspective has everything to do with the consequences of their decisions.
Mm-hmm.
The second, linking it to mental health. We all know that when we are faced with a right and a right dilemma, especially as we are growing in our scope of influence and our scope of power, there is no doubt in my mind that the decision you make will have impact not only for your well-being, but the well-being of others. I've also come to appreciate that even some of the most smartest individuals in relation to their domain of expertise sometimes can make decisions that have repercussions on the mental health and well-being of themselves, their families, and many others. So decision-making process is one that we shouldn't be taking lightly. We should remember that our mind will look for associations in order to break things down into a right and a wrong. We have to also bear in mind that our self-interest will play into that. So how do we control that? We have to have self-control around that. And we can only have these things as we build regularities around our decision-making process. And that can only come through formulas, and structure. So there's got to be a structured way to reach that decision.
And you mentioned formulas. What would you consider is an appropriate formula that a person can use? Maybe they can fall back to, or even just questions they can ask themselves as they go through a tough decision.
Yes. So I would be, obviously, it would be wrong for me to say to just ask these questions to yourself, because then again, you're only going to answer them based on what you think you know or what you feel you want to see. So one of the things that I do is, as I mentioned, the first gut-wrenching moment is recognizing that there are two options, and so you got to name them. And when you name them, you have to make sure that you have the "and" in there, because if that doesn't happen, your brain will break it down into a right versus wrong, and then you get stuck, and then you're pulled into your self-interest, you're pulled into minimizing all types of risks for yourself. So the first part of my formula is naming it. Then what you do is you set that one aside, and you go and find at least 5 people in your environment who are very different from you, who you know have espoused different values from you, come from potentially different fields from you, and you ask them to present 2 other sets of options. So you've got your set of 1 and 2, well, they get to present other set of 1 and 2. And then what you do is you list them all, and now you look at each option and you talk about resources. You talk about people involved, people impacted, and you have these live debates with the people in the room. Ultimately, the decision will be yours. However, you will feel a lot more comfortable arriving at one that you have done all that you can to consider the players, consider the consequences, currently and future, as well as be prepared to walk with that decision.
Mm-hmm. And let's say you make one of those decisions, but you feel like you made the wrong one. Maybe you look back at it 1 or 2 years later. How do you cope with that? And what is a healthy way of coping with that?
So one of the good news is that our lives present us opportunities on a daily basis to really change the course of where we find ourselves. And it is true, often we find ourselves 2 years later and we're like, oh gee, if I had made another decision, I definitely would have been on a different trajectory. In that moment lies the opportunity to make a new decision. So it doesn't, we can talk about this, but it's actually in that moment of recognizing that where we find ourselves comes down to the choices we've made, the decision we've made a few years back. In that very moment lies the opportunity to make a new decision, one that now can point the way forward. And so there's no need to find ourselves spiraling down the web of guilt. And I see that as wasted energy. And what I prefer to say instead is, let's ride that wave of discomfort and recognize that here's another opportunity to make another decision.
It's amazing. And Mirella, 20 minutes just flew by just like that. And
Already done.
yes. And I mean, I wanted to explore the case studies a little bit more, but the great thing is everybody can always reach you, which I implore everybody to do, because this is just the start of this conversation as we make so many difficult decisions in our, not just our personal lives, but in our professional lives. And so I just want to thank you all for tuning in today, everyone that's here. This is all the time that we have, but if you do have any further questions, or if you'd like to potentially work with Mirella in the future, you can go ahead and shoot me an email, and I would love to get you connected. We will also be continuing our virtual speaker series with an introduction to a curiosity summer camp for adults. And this is going to be on Friday, which you're not going to want to miss. Curiosity is crucial to the success of your organization moving forward, because without curiosity, there is no creativity or innovations, which means there is no connection and trust amongst the people who need to drive change. And so, going to be very interesting, and I hope to see you there on Friday. But once again, Mirella, thank you for coming in today, and for everybody at home, stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, and have a great Canada Day tomorrow. We'll talk soon.
That's right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Daniel. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
It's a pleasure for me. Take care.